that are going to determine whether this is a success or whether, in fact, it will be a partition.
I think I understand you to believe that what we ought to have here is, rather than the building up of the Bosnian military capability, there ought to be a build down of the Serbian, the Bosnian Serbs.
Which will inevitably, I think, occur.
Why will it occur?
Look, they are exhausted. There are 600,000 Serbs left in the Serbian part of Bosnia. There used to be 1.5 million Serbs in Bosnia. The 600,000 in the Serb part, 150,000 in the Bosnian part, and 750,000 have left. Now, if some of those people come back, the mixture changes. The main city, Banja Luka, is actually the one city in Bosnia which is not destroyed. It's actually untouched, right, except for some mosques, 16 mosques that have been blown up. And actually there, the Muslims were protected by the local population. They were only expelled in the very end, and even today there are about 6,000 Bosnians living in Banja Luka. So I think that it will not be impossible to rebuild a multi-ethnic society. It's going to be difficult, but not impossible. And when you, particularly, I put very much emphasis on the role of the War Crimes Tribunal. I think it's very, very important that it should be
Do you expect
effective.
to see Karadzic and Mladic on trial?
Yes.
You do?
Yes, I do. Oh. And in fact, it's very difficult to see how they will not be on trial.
Who's going to arrest them where?
We've been very firm on the principles that the War Crimes Tribunal's jurisdiction has to be respected. So actually, the treaty gives the power to the commander and the main civilian, who is implementation officer, to reimpose the embargo on Yugoslavia if they are found to be not in compliance with the peace treaty.
So Milosevic is going to make sure that these two guys are arrested and
well, I think that it's going to be very tough, because if they are arrested and if they sing, then Milosevic himself may find himself before the tribunal.
So what would you do then if you were Milosevic?
I'm actually amazed that he's accepted all these terms, but it will be very difficult to resist. Yeah. You see, also the reconstruction effort will be conditional. The humanitarian aid will be unconditional, but the reconstruction will be conditional, so that the Serbian part of Bosnia will also have to accept the presence of the war crimes investigators. And I think this is tremendously important, both for re-establishing political stability in Bosnia and for the future. I mean, this will be, law is built by precedent. Mm-hmm. And this is going to be a very important precedent. So I think one should not underestimate. People think, well, that's just a lot of words. I think this time it's really going to happen. I'll certainly do whatever I can to make sure that it does.
Well, what does that mean?
Well, I think we all have to apply pressure. I think that the mechanism is there to make it work. It's really a question of the will of the international community. See, because if we just sort of let it go, then it will slide. So it really is public opinion that will dictate on this point.
What is amazing about this, and I've done as many programs as anybody, I think, in broadcast journalism on the subject of Bosnia.
Yes.
It amazes me how much has been now placed on this accord. Mm-hmm. The savior of NATO, mm-hmm. the savior of America's reputation in the world.
Yes.
And you go down the list of one item after another. Mm-hmm. We've invested an enormous amount.
Yes.
And somehow coming to some kind of acceptable end to this conflict.
Right.
Because the heinous nature of the atrocities committed has been so
Yeah, unfortunately, we have not been moved by the heinous nature of those.
Right.
We were moved by, and this is where our national interest has been brought into question, NATO. The credibility of NATO was at stake. So it was NATO, and the credibility of our president was also at stake. So those two things are finally the elements that have moved us to change our attack.
Last time you were here, you said to me that you had supported President Clinton in 1992. You were unlikely to support him in 96 and will probably support Dole, if I heard you.
Well, I have just written him a letter to say that in view of the latest developments, I will support him in 96.
So you're back supporting Clinton in 96?
Yes, based on what, but the fact that finally we begin to have some kind of a foreign policy. I was very critical of Clinton for not having a coherent policy.
So, but what about Dole, who all along has advocated, lift the embargo and strike all along? So,
yeah, well, you see, I think that Dole is also acting responsibly, as having endorsed he played a very strange game, actually, because he was for lifting the embargo, but he was very much against the use of troops.
Yes.
And it was a kind of a somewhat ambivalent
I agree with you, but at the same time, what's interesting is the use of troops sort of got accepted in the beginning because we talked about using them to pull out. The president's word will use American troops to pull out, to help the NATO troops withdraw, perhaps to make available the opportunity to use airstrikes. But that whole notion became moved over and those same troops and the idea of using American troops all of a sudden was to play a different role, which was not to help somebody evacuate, but to be in a peacekeeping function.
Right. Well, you see, that was the original offer, actually.
Right.
It was originally a peacekeeping offer. Then it changed to a NATO withdrawal offer.
Mission.
And then when the UN troops were mistreated, and President Chirac took a firm stand, that's when we changed our tack.
It's good to have you here. There are many things we talk about. I hope you have come back soon. I mean, I am struck by this notion as I leave you. It is Milosevic evidently acted because the embargo and sanctions against Serbia were having an impact, which makes me wonder how much economic force, in a positive way, on part of the private sector, people like you, could be brought to bear
on Bosnia
as a positive instinct.
It is the most important, but it's the most important thing now. And I think there is a package now about $4-5 billion, and it properly implemented, it will really make a difference.
Because leaders like that like nothing better than staying in power. Yeah. And if somehow they can deliver some economic change that benefits their constituents.
Well, I mean, Milosevic has really changed the attack. He was the one who really started it all. He unleashed this ethnic thing.
In the interest of a greater Serbia.
Right, and now he is the great leader for peace. Whether he can get away with it is another story.
All right, great to see you, George.
Okay.
George.